Hello all. After a month away, we return to part 6 of our Cultivating Faith devotional series in time for the return of the harvest season. We had hoped this devotional would coincide with a visibly plentiful harvest for farmers here in Saskatchewan, yet we all know that this is not our reality. We know that other years have brought in a bountiful crop, and we hope someday this will be the story once again, just not this year. This year, farmers are being asked to persevere, to continue to work hard, and be faithful to bring in and find ways to utilize whatever crop the land did produce. The Canadian Food Grains Bank, in many ways, uses what we could refer to from the Bible as the Joseph principle. We store up grain in years and places of plenty, knowing that there are also years and places of famine in which reserves will be needed for the saving of many lives. A reference to Genesis 50:20. Here in Canada, many of us are accustomed to plenty, perhaps more plenty than we even realize at times. We assume the cupboards will remain full, perhaps even overflowing, and most of us have not experienced any level of food insecurity. In this way, we have much to learn from peoples and lands who have experienced more famine in current history. In several verses of Psalm 65, the writer speaks words of praise for how God cares for the land and its inhabitants, allowing it to produce grain, providing rain and blessing its crops. Verse 11 refers to God crowning the year with bounty. A quick reread of Genesis 1 reminds us that God designed our earth for abundance and bounty. In a recent trip to Vancouver Island, our family was once again reminded of the beauty and diversity of God's creation as we swam in cool freshwater river channels overshadowed by a forest of deciduous trees. We also found ourselves 1 week later camping near a raging forest fire in Vernon, BC. Due to drought-like conditions and high winds, the flames overtook a hillside as trees were set ablaze, creating a visible red inferno that was so intense we could hear the fire 5 kilometers away on the other side of the lake. We sat in wonder as God's creation was seemingly being destroyed and prayed for people, their homes, and for rain. As I reflect on these experiences, I admit it is much easier to sense God's presence in places of abundance, and much harder to do when creation is groaning and struggling to survive. It also seems needed to once again ask, what role do we have, as chief stewards of God's creation, to work with God and make His loving presence known here on earth? For example, have we done our part to keep creation functioning as God designed it, and or help each other adapt to the conditions we find ourselves in globally? In the past few months, we have included in these devotionals voices from farmers who work together with the Food Grains Bank. This month, we bring you the voice of someone who works for one of Food Grains Bank member agencies, Mennonite Central Committee. Rick Gunther, who also does happen to live on a farm in Hepburn, Saskatchewan, is MCC Saskatchewan's Communications and Donor Relations Director. We've asked Rick to share his own experience in life and work about relating to and partnering with God in times of plenty and also in times of struggle and difficulty.
I certainly resonate with the emotions that many farmers are experiencing this year due to the kind of harvest we have. I grew up on a farm and operated the farm myself for over 20 years, experiencing both bountiful harvests and really poor crops. In fact, I still have a wheat crop out there that's not looking so good that needs to be harvested. And now we just got over 1.5 inches of rain on it when it's too late to impact the yield, and of course will most likely reduce the quality. Of course, it's always easier to attribute a bountiful crop to God's handiwork and generosity, and I tend to shy away from attributing the results of a poorer crop to God. In those situations, I resolve the dilemma by challenging myself to be grateful for whatever we received. Fortunately, in God's upside-down kingdom, a bountiful harvest does not just refer to quantity. Rather, I believe we can think of harvest in the context of being co-creators and co-workers with God, working together in mission as God calls all of us to. Creation continues to happen, and God called us to participate. This idea is represented and woven throughout several places in Scripture, starting in the book of Genesis. And I believe this includes the very tangible activity of a farmer growing and harvesting a crop. Our God is interested in the human and earthy things of our lives, so there's joy and meaning in sharing in the work and the harvest with God, no matter what the quantity turns out to be. And as any farmer or gardener would know, this honor is in addition to the profound privilege to grow and share food with others so that people can eat. It's participating in meeting the most basic of human needs that we get to be a part of. I believe that working or co-creating with God manifests itself in other earthy, human, and hands-on ways. It's getting down in the dirt with someone, investing ourselves in other people's brokenness, failures, needs, hopes, and even contributions that also produces a bountiful harvest. Perhaps a deeper kind of harvest, one of restored souls, relationships, and hope. In that way, my work at MCC is not unlike that of farming. Sometimes the harvest is making sure that a family migrating from Venezuela through Colombia and on to Ecuador has enough to eat along the way as they deal with the trauma of being forced to move and forced to figure out new ways to survive. Sometimes the harvest is about providing resources and instructions to people in a village in Zimbabwe to learn about new conservation techniques to grow a more productive crop in a drought-ravaged region where people are not getting enough to eat and have not been getting enough to eat for years. Sometimes the harvest is about arranging the opportunity for farmers in the jungles of Colombia to grow alternative crops like rice and cacao, or chocolate, instead of cocoa, the crop that is used for cocaine production. Sometimes the harvest is about making sure that a school exists in a community that children can attend to in their village, which sets them up for vocational opportunities and a future that they would not normally have had, and in many other ways, of course. At the same time, just like a bad crop year for a farmer, our work at MCC has its challenges too. It's not always a bountiful harvest of quantity. There are times when there's not enough resources to do all that could be done. Sometimes it's being unable to offer support to a family from the DR Congo or from Eritrea who has already been through and seen more chaos and more trouble than anybody should ever have to. Sometimes the harvest is seeing people suffer even more as a new conflict arises that delays or prevents MCC from getting relief supplies to where it was supposed to go. Sometimes there's difference of opinion about how, or even if, one should engage in a certain kind of work. Sometimes things don't turn out like you plan. Sometimes situations compel you to shut down a program where the work is not yet done. Sometimes government policy or action makes work very difficult or impossible in a certain country. And sometimes you just can't think of ways to communicate a desperate situation to enough people. In those kind of occasions, and many others like it, it doesn't feel like an abundant harvest. Just like the weather for a farmer, the conditions are not always optimal for a great yield. But through those not so bountiful harvests, I have found it helpful to be reminded that we are co-creators and co-workers with Christ, and to know that we're part of something bigger and deeper than ourselves, and what we ourselves can do or even control. It's comforting to me to know that we work alongside a God of justice and grace, and a God who never stops working together with us to make all things right. With that perspective and with that faith, one can rejoice without reserve when the harvest is bountiful, and at the same time not be devastated when things don't work out as we would desire. We know that the Creator is not finished, and that God is working to complete and restore all things. And it's in the working together and working towards that meaning is found. It's getting down in the dirt and being involved in the ups and downs of our work and the ups and downs of broken and redeemed relationships. That's where I believe bountiful harvest is found. And that's where I believe we find abundance.
As I reflect on these good words that Rick has shared, I am challenged to expand my ideas about what makes for a bountiful harvest and open my heart to ways in which God desires to work with me in finding and creating abundance for others. No doubt this will require faith. Faith in God, and faith that God can and is working in all the ups and downs of our lives to produce good things. As we close today, I leave you with a few thoughts and questions. First, where have you seen God at work producing good things for humanity to enjoy? Secondly, is there a place where God is inviting you to work together with others in hopes of creating and sharing a plentiful harvest? Finally, I encourage you also to think of a situation in our world where abundance and bounty is not a reality right now. In faith, pray that God's goodness would find its way into such a circumstances, and be open to the ways that God desires to involve you in making that happen. As you transition into the fall season, may you experience some of the fullness of life that God desires to bring to all of creation. Stay tuned next month for a devotional based on the biblical idea of gleaning. God bless.